Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports, Season 3, Episode 3. As always, it is Drake and Wilson, and in today's episode, we had a pretty crazy week of the NFL. The first slate games were pretty boring to almost an extreme extent, but we did end up getting some really close games, some really good games, and I think as far as the standings go, I think it's fair to say everyone's pretty surprised at where we've ended up. So to start off, I think the most obvious of the matches to talk about, it's been all over the news the past few days, and that would be the Broncos at the Dolphins. Obviously, everyone pretty much and their brother had the Dolphins winning, but by a 50-point margin, and the second most points in NFL history, I think was the unexpected part. Wilson, what were kind of your takeaways from this game, this insane, one-of-a-kind game?
Yeah, Drake, it's been well covered all week, but just by the numbers, the Dolphins had 10 touchdowns, 5 passing and 5 rushing. Tua threw for 4. The running back, Chain, had 2. Mostert had 3. 726 total yards of offense. It's 376 through the air and 350 on the ground. I think the most impressive part there is the 350 on the ground. For Chain to have 200 yards rushing in an NFL game is, it's just not something you're going to see really on a season-to-season basis. And not counting the end of half and the end of game, Miami had 12 drives. So of those 12 drives, like we just said, 10 of them ended in a touchdown. The 2 that didn't, there was one that was a punt away in the fourth quarter. That was when the second string had already come in. And then there was a turnover on downs in the first half for Miami. Other than that, they scored a touchdown on every single drive. Just insane offense, and I think it's been well documented, the speed they have on that team. Tyreek Hill, Tua throwing the ball, and then the running backs, like we mentioned. They didn't even have Waddle in the game, and they just ran over the Broncos. And this is a Broncos defense that had performed very well over the last couple of years, and we can get to that a little bit later on. But really just all the credit to the Tua and the Dolphins for what they're able to do. Mike McDaniels continues to be an offensive genius. Just the creativity and the motion that they're running is just something super fun to watch week in and week out. And, before the season, I did like the Dolphins. I picked them to make the AFC title game, so I like their X factors. I'm going to keep riding with them.
Yeah, so I do want to touch on the Broncos, but first, I'll kind of just close on what you said. I think the speed is what I give Mike McDaniel most credit for because, we've seen teams put together, fast players before, but never to this capacity. I mean, Devin Arcane, fastest running back in the draft last year. Tyreek Hill, obviously, his speed is second to none in the league. And Jalen Waddle, as you said, who didn't even play, another just unbelievably 4.3 type speed guy. I mean, he has one of the top rushing times. And Raheem Mostert, obviously, as we know in San Fran a few years ago in that title game against Green Bay, ran for 200, and a lot of that is because of his breakneck speed. I saw someone calling them the Legion of Zoom, obviously parodying the Legion of Boom, and I thought that was funny. And I think that's really, again, what stuck out to me is the speed. And also Devin Arcane, I just really think for your second NFL game to rush for 200, that's pretty cool. He only had 1 carry in the New England game, but I knew obviously everything I'd read about him and all the film I'd watched of him in college. I saw, has that next level speed, but a lot of it was kind of just seeing, if he would be able to utilize it to the fullest, right? Being able to keep up with the speed of the NFL. And in his first real game as a starter, I think he showed that he can. Raheem Mostert served as a great complementary back, and I really think now this might be, I'm not trying to exaggerate here, I know it's pretty early, but I do put this up there with one of the better running back committees in the league. Not to mention they have all Pro Bowl fullback Alec Ingold. I know a lot of people don't know his name. Played for the Raiders famously. Was a really good blocker for him, and one of the reasons Josh Jacobs came into prominence, and I think he's a big reason for that. And as well as, again, they just... everything they do is done well. It's very Shanahan, where their offense, it just looks so fluid. It looks so clean. There's very few mistakes. And I think that's why Tua complements it. Tua, obviously, he's one of the best anticipatory throwers in the league. He underthrows a lot of throws. We see them on SportsCenter all the time. And I'm not even huge on Tua for that reason. I'm scared of his arm when it comes to big games. But in a Mike McDaniel's offense, he's trying to make it so that Tua can do what he does best, and that is these anticipatory throws where Tua knows where the ball needs to be, even if he knows he can't 100% get it there the best in his ability. That's not the goal. Mike McDaniels isn't trying to win on that, and I think that's what I compliment Mike McDaniels the most for, making the best of your situation. Tua is a very talented quarterback. I think his ceiling's a little lower than a lot of the top guys in the league right now, but that's not to say he can't be an all-pro passer, as we saw, again, in this Broncos game, because I don't even think for as crazy as the stat line is, I don't think he individually did anything amazing. Their whole team was just firing on all cylinders. Everyone was good. And to me, it was the running backs, like you said, who stuck out. It wasn't Tua this game, which is crazy to say for a guy who threw 300 yards. But I think if you remember, last year he started out just as hot in that Baltimore game. So Tua's kind of had these hot starts. So it's to see if he can sustain it is more what I'm looking for in the Dolphins. And as well as just to see how they keep it fresh, keep it new. That was one of the issues Andy Reid had early in his career, was keeping it fresh. And I'm sorry I just kept going on, but it's very interesting watching this offense. It's something like I've never seen before.
Absolutely. And, don't apologize there. You made a lot of great points about that offense and the way they've kind of come together. I think it's an interesting dynamic to consider with Tua, because I'm right there with you. I think there are some concerns around his arm, and I think there's questions about whether or not he's a system QB. I think where the conversation becomes a little bit interesting is, depending on the system that's being run, to what extent are you just a system quarterback, right? Like, there's a lot made right now about Brock Purdy and the Niners, right? And people think that any quarterback could, do well in that system, just with those receivers, the Shanahan offense, the way that offense is run. They've got some of the best backs in the league. You could say the same thing about Miami to an extent, but there is something to be said about the timing and anticipation that Tua was able to play with, and that connection and chemistry he's able to build with those receivers. And, people want to plug and play quarterbacks in any system, but I think, again, there's something to be said about the element of building a specific system around a quarterback, knowing the limitations and strengths of that player. And, I think right now we're seeing a perfect system for Tua, and that's why that offense looks so good. Obviously, 70 points isn't going to be sustainable throughout the season. I do have some questions about when the weather changes and they go on the road in some harsher weather environments, whether or not they're going to be able to sustain factors with the speed. I also wonder if defenses are going to be able to switch up that strategy that the Chargers used, jamming the receivers on the line of scrimmage, trying to throw off some of that timing anticipation that he was able to use. That being said, I think the biggest concern for Miami moving forward has to be that defense, and not that the defense was any problem for them in this game. We just don't have a large sample size on whether or not that defense is going to be able to hold up. And with that, I'll transition over to the Broncos side of this, where, people can talk about it's a head coaching issue, it's a Russell Wilson issue. This game, obviously, it was a defense issue. And to me, that's really the point that I wanted to emphasize the most. Obviously, Payton brought in his own DC, Vance Joseph, and while they don't necessarily have issues with him, I do think there have to be questions asked of, this defense that was a top half defense over, 7 of the last 8 seasons, I think is the number. It really does not look the same at all this year. And obviously they're missing a couple of their key guys there this past Sunday. But the defensive regression to me just has been a little shocking. And, obviously when you give up 70, you have to ask questions.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what I really want to say is I made a video, and I look really smart now in hindsight. I made a video right before the season talking about how I don't like Sean Payton personally, and I don't think he's a great head coach. And I think now we're seeing that. You can't preseason be throwing the old coach of the team under the bus saying how bad he is and then have a worse record than him to start the season. That just can't happen. And you were traded for a first-round pick, which no coach is worth that regardless. And on top of that, okay, so you're an offensive guru. Yeah, Drew Brees. Let's be honest, that's what it is. You aren't an offensive guru. You won 1 Super Bowl, and again, you had one of the most loaded. You had the most accurate quarterback in NFL history. That is statistically proven, and you still struggled to make it to the Super Bowl. You made it once. That's on you. And now, again, here you are with a very talented offense. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, that Javonte Williams had a fantastic rookie year, looked to be the future. And I love the Jaleel McLaughlin pick as well. And you're making them all look bad, and that goes back to you. Because Russ is playing way better than last year. So we can now start to say Russ isn't nearly as much of an issue. And then you brought up, well, he brought Vance Joseph, and he's not playing, and he's not coaching well, or something's not happening. And that, again, falls on Sean Payton. If I'm the Broncos, I'm pissed. I just traded a first-rounder for a head coach who talked about how terrible our organization is and how questioned our decision making, and was talking about how Russell Wilson needs to stop kissing babies. He's given us all these quotes, but has given us absolutely nothing on the football field. If they lose against the Bears this week, I genuinely think it could go down potentially as the worst season by a head coach who'd previously had success ever. Because at least guys like Mike McCarthy, when they came back, Bruce Arians, they did something. What if Sean Payton comes out of retirement from Fox, and then does this? Does this invalidate what he did earlier? I think there's an argument to be said that it might not have been nearly as much of him as we all like to think it was. And I think that's just what really sticks out to me is the Sean Payton fraud watch is, I think, what I'm going to be calling it the rest of the year, because this is just atrocious. This is one of the worst teams I've ever seen.
he's got to be on one of the hottest seats in football right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think I mirror word for word everything you just laid out there. I think the coaching job has been absolutely horrific so far. And the irony is, everything that he criticized Nat Hackett and the Broncos for last year, it's the exact same Broncos team with the worst defense. Right? He talked about the penalties that they're acquiring, the offense not being on the same page, just resting a wristband. Those are all things that Payton himself was coming in claiming, they're going to make the playoffs. All of a sudden, the team has more penalties than they had last year through 3 weeks. The offense looks worse. The defense looks worse. And again, Sean Payton sitting in the head coach seat, all of that falls on him. Whether it's the defense or the offense, it doesn't matter what side of the ball he feels most responsible for. He's the head coach of that team, and they look like the worst team in football right now to me.
No, I agree. I just think it's egregious what he's done. I mean, I love so many, and again, part of the reason I'm upset for them is I always feel bad for the players, right? Because you saw the offensive lineman. His name's slipping me right now. I didn't write it down, but in his post-conference interview, Garrett Bowles, he's been there for 7 years, and he was talking about how all they've done is lose. And it's just, it's true. You have to feel for the players in this circumstance. A guy like Jerry Jeudy, drafted so high with a ceiling like none other, similar to Jalen Waddle in college, Devonta Smith. He ran with those guys. Had very little production in the pros. Javonte Williams, stellar rookie year, hasn't really done anything. Pat Surtain, arguably the best corner in the league when healthy, and even he looks like out of place and not put in a position to succeed. Why was he not shadowing Tyreek Hill all game? It's just so many questions from that game, and again, like you said, it all falls on head coach.
Absolutely. So I think with that, we'll move over to the Colts and Ravens. A great game here that did not look so great early on. Obviously, the Colts took it away 22-19 in overtime. And, a lot of stories you can take out of this one. Obviously, there's the kicker story. Where do you want to start?
I think for me, I just want to start. We just talked about bad coaching. Let's talk about fantastic coaching. I think these are the Baltimore Ravens. John Harbaugh has coached one of the best teams the last, I'd say, as long as he's been in the league. And Shane Steichen looks like he's on his way. Shane Steichen could not have come into a more tumultuous first 3 weeks, and to come out of it with a 2-1 record after Vegas had your win total at 5.5, I think is pretty insane. As a Colts fan, I had us winning 4 games this year. So I think the fact that we're already halfway there to our win total last year shows how much coaching does. Frank Reich had way more talented rosters, had a roster that had 7 Pro Bowlers and couldn't get it done. Shane Steichen has a roster probably with just 1 or 2 right now, and they look like one of the more complacent teams in football. Rolling with the punches. Jonathan Taylor holds out over the offseason. Anthony Richardson deals with some injuries early. Doesn't stop him. Gardner Minshew, he puts him into the offense, and they go with it. Zach Moss, Deion Jackson plays bad. They cut him. They move on. They go to Zach Moss, the guy they wanted to start with. He does well. I mean, they're just rolling with the punches. Darius Leonard, still on a snap count, trying to get him back. Zaire Franklin's playing like a defensive player of the year. I just think what we're seeing right now, I think, is the importance of a coach, as well as the importance of, I just think, what an offensive coach especially gives you in a league that's shifting towards offense. As sucky as it is, you really just want to be an offensive guy. And Steichen has talked about how his defensive background has helped him, but most recently, obviously, being the Eagles OC when they went to the Super Bowl, I think is really, where we've seen this. And to turn this Colts offense upside down in a year, I mean, when they had Matt Ryan last year and the same offensive line that was bottom 5 in the league is now top 5 in the league, I just think it shows how much coaching is really a catch-all and why coaches should get more credit and more credit for success and more credit for failure.
Yeah, and I think you've done a great job over the past couple of years as we've talked NFL, of really pitching to me how important a coach is, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And I think you see it in both aspects, both when a coach such as Steichen gets promoted to the head coach of a different team, as well as their loss in the team that they were coaching last year. I think this year with the Eagles, the offense hasn't looked as good as it was last year. A little bit more normal against the Bucks this past weekend, but clearly not as potent as it was last year, particularly with Hurts' passing game. And again, I think a lot of that is, falls on the shoulders of the loss of a guy like Shane Steichen, bringing in a new OC. You just get a different dynamic, and you're losing the mastermind of a guy that obviously got promoted to a head coaching position. You did a great job just talking about why the offense looks so different. I think to me it shows in the players that are prepared week in and week out. Zach Moss, 30 carries for 122 yards, and you're right, that's with the absence of Jonathan Taylor. Gardner Minshew comes in, and he's your guy, one of your favorite backup/veteran quarterbacks in the league. Throws for 227 and a touchdown, and he took 5 sacks from a strong Ravens D-line, but for the most part he looked very poised in the pocket, and the offense was humming along. Super poised obviously down the stretch, and those field goal kicks really is kind of where I want to land with this one. Obviously, it's ironic in a game that features Justin Tucker, but Colts kicker Matt Gay, 4 field goals over 50 yards. Just an incredible feat. Kickers, another part of the game I think that goes overlooked a little bit at times. But, for him to be able to hit from that distance so consistently allowed the Colts, to sustain shorter drives on the field, get out to a farther away field goal difference and feel comfortable kicking the field goal. So obviously a
Not
shout
to
out there.
mention, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but not to mention in a rain game, which just makes everything that much harder. And Shane Steichen talked about that in his pregame, some of his practice press conferences this week, how they were playing with wet balls all week. They were dunking them in water and then throwing them into play. And I think you saw that with the Colts. The Ravens had 2 fumbles in their home stadium in a rain game. The Colts had none, no interceptions, no turnovers, played a clean game. And like you said, Matt Gay ultimately won it again, kicking well against the Ravens. I think that again comes down to coaching. Don't get me wrong, I think Matt Gay is a very talented player, but to just put your players in a position to succeed, it's obviously what Shane Steichen is doing right now, and my hat's off to him.
Yeah, I just quickly on the Ravens here then, obviously a not so great loss for the Ravens here. It's a game that you kind of have to win, especially considering the preseason expectations for both of these teams. You and I talked at length last week about the X factors surrounding Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in the pursuit of trying to become a Super Bowl contender. And to me, just watching that game over this past weekend, I think the questions for Lamar, to me, is he's looked a little different under pressure this year. In the past, he's been able to stay calm and create in those situations, but this year, he hasn't been great. I think under pressure, he's 6 of 16 with an interception per PFF, and just not as good as he's been in years past. Obviously, we saw a lot more rushing out of Lamar this past weekend, over 100 yards, pretty strong in that department. But obviously, I think the passing is just continues to be the question for Lamar. Obviously, his weapons weren't, all with him. He's missing OBJ, Andrews. But yeah, that continues to be the question for me. Can Lamar continue to develop? And, we're still seeing him mesh with that new OC. I'm hopeful for them, but to me, that still is the lingering question for me on the Ravens side of the ball.
After watching this game, that is genuinely one of my only takeaways from this game for Baltimore is you can just tell Lamar's learning a new offense. He's had a pretty inept passing game these last few years, and they're trying to run a pro-style offense now. He's throwing again. And again, they aren't getting away from him running. Obviously, he's one of the most talented runners in the league, but you can just tell, you're seeing him process things, and I think that's why he's worse under pressure. It's taking him a little longer this year to understand things. I mean, it is, again, it's crazy how much these guys have to learn an entire new offense in a year, and we give them crap if they don't immediately. It's crazy. And I think, again, I'm not saying he gets a pass all year, to not play well, but I think it's kind of understandable to not play well under pressure when you're still trying to figure everything out. That's really my only takeaway from them, because besides that, you could see they struggled in the ground game, due to J.K. Dobbins being out, but still managed with Lamar and Gus Edwards. But obviously, Zay Flowers, I think, looks like a fantastic player. I think they got a real gem with him, even though he didn't have a great day. They're just finding ways to get him involved, which I think is going to help out a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. And then staying on the topic of quarterbacks, then we'll switch over to our last game on the slate we wanted to cover for our A block this week, and that's the Saints visiting the Packers. Obviously, the Packers had that fourth quarter rally, huge comeback, scoring 18 straight in that fourth quarter. Where do you want to start with this one?
I don't know. Maybe the Matt LaFleur play call to go for 2 in the fourth quarter. I kind of love it because it's the opposite of what Josh McDaniels did in that Raiders game where he kicked the field goal instead of going for the points. I completely understand. Sometimes you have to play like you don't deserve to be there because you probably don't deserve to be there. The Green Bay was not in this game until that fourth quarter. I mean, they played terrible football. Jordan Love had some really bad plays. A.J. Dillon has regressed for some reason. I really liked him as a back, but he doesn't look great. Romeo Doubs is really coming into his own and proving that I think he could be a high-end wide receiver 2, similar to kind of T. Higgins, maybe a receiver 1 on some teams. I mean, I'd take him over the entire Colts receiver core right now, I'll tell you that. And you just look at all this without Aaron Jones against the Saints, a very stout defense that is very stingy. Their DBs have the most forced incompletions in the league. All 4 of them are their 4 top corners are in the top 5 for forced incompletions. A really stingy defense, but Jordan Love and the Packers just really rallied. I think Matt LaFleur is really coming into his own now that Rodgers is gone, figuring it out. And I think he's taking Jordan Love with him because I still think Jordan Love shows some things that I'm not huge on. But in that same game, he showed a whole lot of things I love. You see glimpses of Aaron Rodgers, and you're like, holy cow, I see why you got him. So I think that's kind of my biggest takeaway is Matt LaFleur, I kind of love that play call. Even if they would have lost by it, I would have understood because, your expectations aren't high. You're 1-1. You're playing a team that is more talented. They have a Pro Bowl quarterback. They have a very loaded backfield. They have great weapons and a fantastic defense. You're the underdog. Sometimes you just have to play like it, and I love that mentality.
Absolutely. I think you and I were watching games on the same TV this weekend because I really just sound like an echo chamber to everything you've been saying, but I'm with you. I loved that play call. It's the typical when you're down 14, going for too early, give yourself a chance if you don't make it to have the second conversion opportunity. And it's funny because if they don't convert on that, LaFleur might get killed, right? If, all of a sudden, if they lose the game 17-15, people are looking at him like he's an idiot. Obviously, they win the game, so he looks a lot better. But, I really respect that. I think, it shows guts, it shows belief in your team, especially when you guys are down in that position, showing that down the stretch, you still believe that you guys can win that game. And on the topic of Jordan Love, a rough game in a lot of departments, like you messed up. He was only 50% completions, but to me, I really liked that he showcased that ability to scramble. He ran the ball 9 times for 39 yards, and that Green Bay offense has been bombing away. He's got the most deep passes in the league as, a first-year starter, essentially, and they've been rewarded in some odd areas. They've got 154 yards and penalties on defensive pass interference. That's more than double the second-place team, which is the Cowboys. And just LaFleur showing the confidence in his young quarterback to throw that deep ball so consistently. They're not connected on a lot of them. I think Jordan Love has 31% of his passes are deemed uncatchable. That is an insane stat. That's not great to have on your side, especially explains a lot of that completion percentage. But again, when they're able to pull out wins in these type of contexts, I think it speaks a lot to the coaching and the belief that team has in Jordan Love. And I think it's exciting for the Green Bay future.
No, and I think that's kind of a great point is like to show that faith as a player. You have to love that, your coach having that much faith in you. And again, you need those points anyway. It's already an unlikely comeback. Why not give yourself the most opportunity to figure out how to get those? I've never kind of understood the old school mentality of like, especially late in a game when a team will be down 10 points and they'll kick a field goal first when they're on the 20-yard line, the opposing 20-yard line. It's like, this is probably the best chance you're going to get. You have a minute left. What are the odds you get an onside kick and then drive 60 yards? So I completely understand the play call. And again, you're right. If he didn't get it, though, that's all we'd be talking about, right? But he did, and so he kind of does get the benefit of the doubt. And again, I love that he's just letting Jordan Love sling it. Jordan Love's got a huge arm. Let him use it. He's got to learn somehow. It's kind of the same way the Colts are doing with Richardson. There's a difference between throwing someone to the wolves and having faith in someone. And I think we're seeing two good examples of kind of playing a guy who might be a little raw still, but trying to make him succeed and realize that he can do it.
Absolutely. And the best way to learn is just by making those mistakes and playing in game, right? The game film's always going to be different than the practice film. So I love that the Packers are committed, and I think it's going to pay dividends in the future. Real quickly then, just to end off here, looking at the Saints side of the ball, obviously that NFC South doesn't look as weak as, a lot of people perceived going into the year. I'm still not sold that any of these teams are quite as good as, their records might reflect right now, but it's still an exciting division nonetheless. And, Chris Olave looks like a great weapon out there. Really sad to see Carr go down with that injury. Hopefully he's not out for very long. I think my main problem with the Saints continues to be they're in this middle ground of I don't really think they're ever a true contender, but they refuse to be bad. They're always just going to be in that 7-10 range to 9-8, and I think it's a bad spot to be in because year in and year out they're just going to kind of contend for winning the division and maybe making it to that wild card round, but nothing any further. So I'd really like to see the Saints just commit and maybe accept that they have to be back for a season, but I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's, being a Colts fan, 7 starting quarterbacks the last 7 years, I understand, it's that sense of purgatory that so many teams get stuck in, but you just have to bite the bullet and get your guy at some point, and I think they just have to do that because I'm not sure if it's Derek Carr. And with that, we will go into our next segment where we will be talking the worst teams in the NFL.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sport. This is our B block, and this is going to be a shorter one this week. Drake and I really just kind of wanted to talk about a couple of teams that have been disappointing and some of the worst teams in the NFL so far. So, Drake, to name a few, obviously Carolina, Minnesota, Chicago, and Denver all sitting 0-3. But there's also a slew of 1 and 2 teams that probably aren't that good. Some might think the Patriots, the Jets, the Texans, or the Raiders. Who are you going for here?
So, teams that I don't think are nearly as bad as their records are Minnesota, the Patriots, the Texans. Those 3 in particular. The Texans, because I think C.J. Stroud's a great player. Obviously, now we've seen it. Like everyone said, we all knew he had the highest floor of any of these guys. The dude was a gunslinger in college. Now, the next few steps, that's what we have to see. So I knew they weren't going to be a bad team. I knew they were going to be, again, 5, 6, 7 wins, which, again, I don't think is a bad team. It's just kind of right in the middle. Minnesota, you take away the fumbles, they're probably 3-0 right now. I think it's as simple as that. It's ball control, and they're, again, kind of one of those limbo teams where I think they still need maybe one more piece to truly contend, and losing Dalvin Cook, I think, put them a little behind. When you have the guy who's second place in sacks, the leading receiver, and the best passer in the league, all on your team at the same time, you shouldn't be losing. And the Patriots, the reason I say with them, that defense is stout. That is a solid defensive unit. The O-line is playing fantastic. Mac Jones is finally developing as a passer. Their offense looks like an NFL offense. I just think consistency is what they need, and to get a consistent number one receiver every week, it seems to be a different guy. And I just don't think you can have that in the modern NFL. That's kind of, I think, old school Bill getting in the way. Again, those three teams I don't think are bad. The teams that I think are really, really, really bad are Chicago and Denver. And the Raiders to a lesser extent. Chicago and Denver, obviously both, I think it's organizational failure. Since Peyton Manning's left the Broncos, they've had, I think it's 11 starting QBs. And that's just insane. You can't win a team. You can't win games with that many quarterbacks just cycling through your team. And for Chicago, they've never had a 4,000-yard passer in their history. That should be illegal. They should be relegated to college football or something for that. That's insane. How many times has Kirk Cousins done that on his own? How many times has Dak Prescott done that? I mean, guys who we don't consider great passers do that every other year. But you guys haven't done that once. It's crazy to me. So, and poor Justin Fields, he's regressed. He had so much talent, showed so much promise as a rookie, and he's regressed so much. He doesn't look comfortable. He doesn't look like he knows what he's doing, and no one does on that team. DJ Moore's dropping the ball every other play. Chase Claypool looks like he doesn't even want to be there. And then you go to Denver, the head coach is an idiot. He's giving a quote every week that everyone's quoting a few weeks later, looking at and everyone's pointing, saying, man, look how stupid this guy is. And we already talked about them, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But Denver, I think, has a lot more talent, though, than they get credit for. I just think it's the organizational ineptitudes that hurt them. And with Chicago, I think it's the lack of organizational structure in terms of the team's history. They had the best defense in football. They changed the way defense was played and only won one Super Bowl in '85. They had Walter Payton, only won one Super Bowl with him. They had Richard Dent, Mike Singletary. I could go on and on forever, and they've only won one Super Bowl. And that's on organizational ineptitude. And I think if I'm both of these teams, it's not even at the team's level at this moment. This is organizational failure to a point that is almost never seen. Something has to change inside these organizations. I don't think it's the players. Truly, I don't want to throw the players under these bus for these organizations just being the worst right now.
Yeah, Chicago and Denver have to be the two standout teams that are just absolutely horrific this year. And I'm right with you. I think it's an organizational issue. I think it starts at the top, and there are just things around the organization that are just not going to contribute to any type of winning culture. Hence why we see the messes that we see right now. You know, the lack of development in Justin Fields. To me, the Chicago case is a little interesting. You know, we talked at length about how bad the organization has been run. Chicago is one of the largest markets in the U.S. You know, you usually don't see this level of, you know, poor management in large market teams when there's so much media attention placed on them. I guess you could push back with the Knicks, but
the Cubs,
I guess sure.
106 years of not winning.
Yeah,
Chicago just isn't great.
Yeah, it is puzzling to me, right? So many eyes on them, and just the inability to piece together any type of, you know, solace. But you know, with the Broncos, I think the other thing that you didn't touch on is I think the contract of Russell Wilson is concerning moving forward. He signed a 5-year extension that has not kicked in yet. So they are about to be paying Russell Wilson more than he is getting paid right now. You talked about the talent on that roster. That talent's not going to be there forever. And to me, I don't really see a turnaround for Russ. I think Russ is only going to decline as he, you know, heads towards the twilight of his career. So I think that's a little bit concerning for the Broncos. My big take here is I think the Raiders are going to be surprisingly the team that could very well fare as the worst team in the NFL this year. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Josh McDaniels continues to prove to us why he should not be an NFL head coach. Kicking that field goal when they were down 9 was just puzzling. Did you really think they were going to kick 2 more? I think the Chandler Jones situation is odd, both on the side of himself as well as the management side. And I'm with you. I tend to lean towards the players a bit more here. I think the management is not handling that situation well at all. I also think Jimmy G is just not that guy. And, you know, for a guy that has a 70% win percentage in the NFL history in all of his starts, that is clearly not the same player because it's not the same offense. He doesn't have Kyle Shanahan anymore. People talked a lot about the reunion between him and McDaniels. So we're reuniting a below average quarterback with a bad head coach. Seems like a good pairing to me. And finally, Devontae Adams seems like he doesn't want to be there. It's week 3 and he's already releasing comments about how he wants to be in a winning environment. And while I get that, I think all-star players and all players in general should want to be in that environment, I also think a lot of it's on him. He made the decision to go away from the Packers and sign with the Raiders. Obviously, he wanted the bag. And again, I'm all for players getting their money, but just seems like a bad situation all around in Vegas, And I really think this team could be at the bottom and right in the middle of the Caleb Williams sweepstakes heading into the end of the season.
No, I think that's a good point. And have you ever heard the story about when Josh McDaniels coached the Broncos?
I did not.
Most people might know this or not. They famously started out 6-0 with Kyle Orton, who's a solid passer, but I think he ended his career with like the same amount of interceptions as touchdowns. So okay quarterback, but back up to low-end starter kind of ceiling. They started out 6-0, and a lot of the players have come out and talked about how they were the most prepared they've ever been in their careers. And that was because they got in trouble for filming other teams' practices. They got caught in week 7, and then they infamously lost. And then they only went on to win, I think, 1 game that year. And then he started the next year 3-9 and was famously fired. So Josh McDaniels, that's kind of why he was always in the conversation for coaching candidates and never got it, because again, it's kind of urban legend at this point. But again, when you look at him coaching, you start to realize, the dude hasn't won. He went 6-0 to start his career, right? Which is a solid start to your career. And then he's only won 7 games with the Raiders over the last 2 years. I think that might give some merit to it. I've seen some Denver Broncos players talk about it. And I just also think it speaks to the, again, ineptitude of all of the decisions they're making. Trading for Devontae Adams when you don't even have a quarterback yet. He wanted to play with Derek Carr, famously. And then you get rid of Derek Carr, and then you wonder why he's not happy. And then you sign Jimmy Garoppolo, who's a high-end backup and low-end starter. And you think you're going to change the culture of a team that hasn't been good since John Gruden was its head coach, who just recently got fired for absurd comment. That's another organization that's a mess, I think. And I think that's another reason to point at them kind of as a potential, 2-win team going into the offseason.
Yeah, in hindsight, we should have just called that segment organizational failures, because we just highlighted 3 of the worst in the NFL right now. But right there with you, everything you said, I'm right there with you.
Yep.
I think with that, then we'll close our B block. We'll be right back. We're going to talk some NBA, some breaking news here.
Welcome back into our final segment for the B-Sides of Sports, and today we're talking NBA. I know it's a little early, but with the trade that just happened, we could not talk about it. Really shook up the NBA. 3-team trade occurred, if you aren't aware, with Damian Lillard, famous going to the Bucks is kind of the headline of this deal, but a lot of other pieces were moved around. Portland received Jrue Holiday, DeAndre Ayton, and Toumani Camara, as well as a 2029 unprotected first-round pick from Milwaukee, and a pick swap in 2028 and 2030 with Milwaukee. And then the Suns received Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nasir Little, and Keon Johnson. Obviously, this is a huge trade. A lot of pieces were moving around. Multiple all-pro, all-star level players. Wilson, what's kind of your first, again, we just really have initial thoughts on this, but what are you thinking after looking at this?
Yeah, I think, the initial thought just has to be the Bucks have to be the favorite in the NBA going into next season, right? When you pair Damian Lillard with Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think the only player that would have had a better fit with Giannis would be Steph, and they're obviously getting, not an insult to Lillard, but a discounted version of Steph Curry. And, with that, I understand it from the Bucks' perspective. Giannis had been putting pressure on them that he wanted to win, and he wanted to win now. I think it's a move they had to make. And I think for Dame, although he made a big deal about wanting to go to Miami and only Miami, I think when you're put in a situation like Milwaukee, with arguably the best player in the world, you can't say no to that. On the Trailblazer side of things, I think the trade is a little interesting when I initially looked at those picks. Even if you think that the Bucks aren't going to be great, only getting 1 first-round pick and 2 swaps from a team that probably will still be good, not exactly the return you want to be, especially when you're a young roster, not going to necessarily build around guys like Jrue Holiday. That being said, immediately after the trade, it was announced that they are going to plan to flip Jrue Holiday elsewhere. So I think, with that, we'll have to see what the full returns end up being for the Blazers in order to properly evaluate that. And then on the Suns side of thing, I understand the trade completely. You've got to get depth. Competing in that loaded Western Conference, I think they realized Ayton wasn't that guy that was going to be able to stop guys like Jokic anyways. So why not just trade him in for a bunch of depth? We know that the chemistry there had been off the last couple of seasons, truly. And I completely understand them going out there trying to get some more defense, get a little more well-rounded.
half of what we talked about in the playoffs with Phoenix is how they had no depth, and I think that's why I think this was a great move for them, is because I think the Suns are low-key one of the biggest winners in this trade, because they added some really solid role players as well as high-end starters. Not high end, but like mid end. I think Yusuf Nurkic is like a, above average center by a fair margin. I'd compare him to like Jonas Valanciunas in terms of he can score you 20 points and get you 20 boards some nights. Grayson, obviously 3-point sniper, tenacious defense, dirty player. And Nasir Little, again, I think Nasir is a great player. I don't know much about Keon Johnson, if I'm being 100% transparent, but still, again, you needed depth and you traded for it. And with Portland, I think the most interesting thing about this is, I was talking with Wilson before and he wasn't aware of this. Damian Lillard released a song called Farewell shortly thereafter getting traded, in which he had some just, I think, questionable lines. I'm going to open up the tab again so I can just pull it up. Just kind of questionable lines talking about how he left the team better than he inherited it, as well as they don't really know what they're missing and they'll never get a player like him and they'll realize that soon. And to me, I've always really liked Dame. This kind of paints him in a not so great light in terms of, you're going out, you had this song ready that really just looks like you never wanted to play for them and never were, as well as I think giving argument for some collusion arguments. Jimmy Butler brought it up in a Instagram story, and I think there's a genuine case for it. Having this video ready, that means you were very committed to leaving, but not only committed to leaving, but ready to leave. Like, I mean, the dude had a song ready. There's production, there's lyrics. This stuff he'd been thinking about for a while, and I still love Dame. I'll give him a chance to kind of let his ball talk, but I gotta say I'm not huge on that from him. I really like and respect him as a player, but this kind of takes him down a little bit for me, because I think this is kind of a strange move to do to a town that gave you such an opportunity to be the face of Portland sports, and they don't have much going on there. You really were the face of them, and then to kind of bash on them after you leave, I think is a kind of questionable decision.
Yeah, I think that's where I wanted to end off here too. And I'm glad it's kind of at the end of the podcast, because I don't want this to sound like Damian Lillard slander, even though it's going to come across as such. And that really just being a kind of ironic turn for a player of Lillard's caliber at the end, and not even the end, right? But kind of in the second chapter of his career, right? All along, we've known Dame as this incredibly loyal guy. He was going to fight through everything. He was going to build from the bottom with this organization, again, that did not have much before him. And, he knows that. But again, there's a lot to be said about how much the city and the town bought into what they were trying to do there. And while they came up short a lot of times, again, I don't think there was ever an expectation of Dame needed to win the title with the rosters that were put around him. And just to kind of see it get ugly here a little bit at the end, talk about holding out, wanting to only go to Miami, not really needing to consider what Portland was getting back. I'm glad he landed in Milwaukee. I think it's a good opportunity for him. And I think, what Portland got and is going to get out of this trade is better than what they would have gotten from Miami. But again, that being said, I really just don't like how Dame forced the hand. And for a guy that's been all about loyalty and, doing the grind and doing things the right way, I think the departure here was a little bit of a sore taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I'm also glad you agreed with me, because I usually don't take such harsh takes against players, and still it's not even nearly as harsh as half the people on SportsCenter saying whatever they say. But it is just kind of strange, because a guy I think kind of everyone loved. Who didn't like Damian Lillard? Dame time, the best clutch shooter in the league, best deep ball heaver in the league. I mean, the dude was so fun to watch. I mean, so many memes have come from him, so many cool moments. There's the Rockets shot, the Paul George shot. The list goes on and on. I mean, the dude was a walking highlight reel, has a cool signature shoe with Adidas. And so, yeah, it's just kind of like you said, where it's weird that a guy who preached loyalty and, not wanting to build a super team, forcing his team's hand like this, and then almost seeing, very selfish about it. And again, I never want to paint someone in that light. I don't know all the circumstances, obviously. But obviously, from what is available to me, it does kind of feel like a very, thinking of myself type move. It really didn't. It's kind of, weird to see a guy who talked and preached so much about his organization to kind of almost, turn away from them in the end, in the twilight of his illustrious, insanely highly paid NBA career.
Absolutely. I think the last thing I have here is just kind of continuing along with that. And I heard Nick Wright say this, and it was a really interesting point to me. I think the only pushback that I would give Dame the benefit of the doubt on, especially with wanting to go to Miami in particular, is maybe Dame wanted to still find an opportunity to be the number one guy in a championship contender. And to be honest, to me, him going to Miami, I don't even know if that would have been the case. I do think Jimmy Butler is probably a better way, better player than Dame overall, especially as a two-way guy, and just Jimmy's ability to kind of elevate his play in the playoffs. But that being said, there would have been an argument there, right? Like Dame could have been the number one guy on, leading Miami to a title. Obviously in Milwaukee, he's not going to be that. And so I do think it's fair through the eyes of Dame to maybe wonder if that's the reason he was so specific about where he wanted to go, because he has been adamant about not wanting to be on a super team and not wanting to do things the cheap way, right? He wanted to the right way. That being said, even though Milwaukee might be the favorite, I don't think they're necessarily overwhelming. Obviously, they got two superstars and then they've got a fringe star in Chris Middleton. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds over this next NBA season.
No, I agree. And with that, we will call today's episode to a close. Again, sorry for the later upload, but if you can tell, I'm not in my usual studio. For a little away from behind the camera. I'm getting married in 2 weeks, and so it's been pretty hectic the last few weeks. So just been on the move a lot. So just time to still get these out on a weekly basis, but the day itself is not so easy to get to. We will be back. We're going to start up our breakdowns, our game breakdowns, very soon here, as well as continuing the weekly pod. But we hope you've been enjoying the content, and we will see you guys next time.